We will be holding a separate workshop with our partners from the LUC universities and do some further planning for the next phase of our activities. So this is very much an ongoing initiative, and it has come about, and if anybody wants to know more about it, please ask me or some of our LUC partners who are here. The university network on climate capacity that I mentioned, we have now an agreement between Oregon State University and IUB, the Independent University of Bangladesh. We will be the joint secretariat for this. This is a much bigger network. We already have a prototype website, but we haven't publicized it yet. We have a steering committee from a number of representatives from a number of universities in the south and the north. This will now officially be launched in March of this year in Bonn, Germany, at the next meeting of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building for developing our own, a national mechanism on loss and damage under the supervision of the Ministry of Disaster Management together with the Ministry of Environment. So we are now, the ball is now in the government's court to give an official notification. Once they do that, then it should move forward, and we hope that will happen fairly soon. So there's been significant progress on this particular item. The next one is the Climate Finance Transparency Initiative, which I mentioned earlier. So climate finance is obviously a very big issue for everybody. We'll have a climate finance session during the conference here. And one of the issues around climate finance is the issue of transparency. And this is transparency both from the funders, the countries and organizations that are providing funding, to be transparent about what are they providing and where is it going and who are they giving it to for and what are they giving it for. And then at the same time for the recipients, countries like Bangladesh, what are we doing with the money? Where is it going and what good is it doing? So we need on our side to also have a mechanism to be transparent about what money is coming into the country and how are we going to be dealing with that money. And so I'm very pleased to say that we have formed a consortium, IUB, ICAD, together with BRAC University and Bangladesh Center for Advanced Studies, Dr. Atik Rahman from BCS, Professor Ainul Nishat from BRAC University, C3R, and myself, together with the Government of Bangladesh, Ministry of Finance's Economic Relations Division, ERD, who are responsible for handling climate finance in Bangladesh. We have formed this new climate finance transparency mechanism, and on that we will later this month, on the 27th and 28th, be holding a big international conference organized by BCAS, Bangladesh Center for Advanced Studies, where we have a number of international participants coming to discuss the issue of climate finance, which is obviously one of the most important parts of tackling climate change. And then the last one on the list is the climate change project for disabled people being amongst those who are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. In the past, they've been relatively neglected, but this project that we are doing with University College London and with the partners in Kenya has made some progress, and Maria Kett, who is here with us today, who is the team leader for this project, will be reporting on it at the session on this. And then hopefully we will be able to share knowledge in the South-South manner for other countries to follow this example. I think I'm coming to the end of my presentation. Let me just end by giving you a little bit of housekeeping. After we finish the plenary session, just before we have our tea, I'd like to ask everybody to join us for a group photograph. Outside there'll be volunteers with t-shirts or signs on them that will direct you. So we want to take the group photograph before you have your tea. And as I said, we will, after this session, we'll have plenary sessions, which will be in the multi-purpose hall just across the foyer of the university as we come out. And during the parallel sessions, there'll be 2 lecture theaters used for parallel sessions as well as the multi-purpose hall. And we have volunteers, a lot of volunteers to help you, direct you if you don't know where to go. And this, let me leave you with a list of all our logos of all our partner institutions. You'll see we have now well over 40. We should reach 50 very soon. Almost every month we get an application from a new institution that applies to join the Gobeshona platform. So we're very pleased that over the last 3 to 4 years, We have made considerable amount of progress in terms of developing new young researchers, sharing information on climate change research, both nationally and internationally, and also using the platform of the annual conference every January as a means of monitoring progress, capturing, stock-taking what we've already learned, and then planning what we need to address in future. And I'd like to also acknowledge with gratitude the support we've received from the government of the United States of America through the USAID office in Dhaka, who have been very supportive of our program, and we appreciate their support. So I'd like to thank Dr. Kerry Reeves of the USAID on behalf of all our partners, Gobeshona partners. With that, I'll conclude here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hawk, for your warm words of welcome and your profound and incisive observations, which really sets the tone of the proceedings and the important conference which it is. It is now my privilege to request Dr. Atiq Rahman, Executive Director of the Bangladesh Center for Advanced Studies, to kindly give his address on this occasion. Dr. Atiq.
Mr. Chairman, friends on the podium, ladies and gentlemen, friends, very warm welcome to this conference here of Gobeshona. As Salim has already explained, Gobeshona is about research. Climate change is one of the 3 areas of global research that is going on, the other 2 being computer, IT, robotics, that whole world, and the whole world of genetic engineering, oncology, and the area which is giving health pioneering critical issues, and climate change is the 3rd one. As far as Bangladesh is concerned, climate change is very, very important in our life, as there are well-distinguished and 13 consecutive parallel phenomenon or impacts that is affecting Bangladesh's life, livelihood, present and future. So climate change becomes very important, and it's a great initiative that many institutions, particularly the young generation, are learning to do research. I'll just share 2 thoughts. One is on research, the other on understanding climate change a bit better and deeper. Right now, as you understand, the world is going through interesting discourse on climate change, where we are, where we are going, and right now pretty much one part of the world is going through a severe cold spell, both Europe and North America, and in Australasia and in the world of California, there is huge wildfires going on still, and very severe. So both heat and cold extremes, and that's what really climate change is about. General understanding of the intergovernmental climate change has brought the science forward, and we need to take that science with as much clarity as possible, but it's extremely loaded, very difficult to give a simple answer. In the last 2 days, I have been in multiple television channels in Bangladesh. The journalists are worried how to communicate the message that there is global warming going on, and we have got all these cold spells, and that has upset many of the big policy makers to whom science is not their strongest subject. So this is an area, in simplest term, weather is the transition or the interaction between a number of parameters: temperature, wind, moisture, precipitation, and that behavior over a short period of time. Days, hours, days, weeks, not even months, is 20 to 30 years over a longer period. Now that makes it, the science of climate has a basis which stimulates climate change research, but climate change is very different from climate science. So climate change science has emerged, and Intergovernment Panel of Climate Change has been the basis of the science. Gobeshona is basically climate change research. There is a big background of climate science into this, but very few of people here do climate science. We do climate change science research. So that has serious implications on all the major security issues in Bangladesh: food, energy, water, livelihood, health, all those issues that troubles all our policymakers all the time, whether it's government or non-government, private sector and otherwise. In terms of broad understanding between these is science, policy and people, that is the relationship that matters with ordinary public decision-making, university research and the world of research. On the other hand, in the private sector, it's people, planet and profit. So there is a lot that private sector is trying to interact and make use of climate change, but they want to be sure that there is enough profit in that. So there are these multiple sources of tension that exist, but nonetheless both are necessary because it has been evident that private sector can deliver certain products and goods and services faster, better and probably more efficiently, and also mobilize international finance in certain ways. So as you might know, about 25 years ago we started the solar energy issues in Bangladesh, and it was absolutely declared that there is no future of solar energy. Right now, Bangladesh, fortunately we have started that movement. We led that movement, we got the science approximately right, and right now 4.5 million households have solar photovoltaic in Bangladesh, world's biggest market, and the market is growing. So there are success stories in climate change area and in terms of delivery system. Similarly, our agricultural scientists have done tremendous amount of input into alternative seeds, salt-tolerant variety, drought-tolerant variety, and flood-tolerant variety of rice and other species including jute. So there is a barrier that we are crossing. Right now in Bangladesh, the central issue of all thrust activities, and there will be some discussion of that in the policy area, is the whole issue of sustainable development, where climate change plays one of the most vital roles. SDG 13 is climate change. So the sustainable development goals, Bangladesh is doing reasonably well. There are some tensions and gaps, but nonetheless, Bangladesh is more ahead than almost any other country in the world. The government is quite well coordinated and things are happening. The private sector, the government, the NGOs, the researchers are working pretty close harmony in sustainable development goals, and we hope that like MDGs will be achieving SDGs. So this is all together, and that's why we need the research, where as Selim said, the young researchers. We see that in the course of, 20 years ago we used to say that we need many research scientists and probably some institutions on climate change. That is already happening across the country. Large number of NGOs are working on climate change, large number of private sector are working on climate change, but the issues are getting bigger and bigger, more complex, more interactive and more challenging. Consequently, what we are now asking is our young generation, the scientists, the young researchers coming up, have to have rigorous, robust training and understanding of the research requirement, because there is no research called Bangladesh standard of research. There is only one standard, which is the global standard, and we must meet it if we want to be in the competitive world of climate research across the various domains. So that is where we are going. Our Ministry of Environment and Forest, has been declared and will be formalized soon as Ministry of Environment, Forest, Environment and Climate Change. So institutionalization is taking place. The external resources, the economic resources division of the government is undertaking the financing part. The Ministry of Environment and Forest is leading the climate decisions policy area. The disaster area is being led by Ministry of Disaster Management. So, lot is happening compared to many other countries in the world. Very soon there will be NAP, the National Allocation Plan, which is moving in the right direction. It's been a bit late, but nonetheless we are moving in the right direction. So, climate change is moving on, and Gobeshona's contribution to that would be making sure that the information and the research output on climate change in Bangladesh is available to all the young researchers, and at the same time, the researchers can give their contribution to the Bangladesh research, the global research, and many of the socio-economic and the output that the world will be demanding. There will be huge, already in many universities across the world, there are more jobs in climate change than almost any other subject. So that expanding the horizon for young people, young scientists, and I'm sure Bangladesh will not fall behind in that. With that general review of looking at the big picture of climate change, where you stand, and how research is so important. And only one word of appeal to the researchers: do not do research for the sake of getting a job or doing some. You must enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, don't do it. Research is a lifetime commitment, and if you really want to enter that world, you must enjoy every day's pain and pleasures of that research. With those words, I would say thank you very much, and thanks to everybody for being here. Welcome to all.
Thank you, Dr. Atiq Rahman, for those insightful observations and words of wisdom drawn out of an extensive experience. I would now like to request Dr. Alice Vele Elsa Halid of the Political Science and International Relations, IRIS, to kindly deliver her keynote address. Dr. Alice Vele, please.
So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to all of you, and it's a real pleasure to be here today in front of you. And thanks, Atiq, in particular for your introductory speech, because it's really a very good introduction of my own speech, as you are going quickly to understand why. So I'd like to start with a couple of questions. Have you ever asked yourself why weaker parties continue to negotiate with stronger parties in multilateral negotiations while they are a priori certain to lose? How a country like Bangladesh can expect to get something from climate negotiations when around the same table you have most powerful countries defending conflicting interests? Those questions have been at the heart of my PhD research that analyzes the workings of Bangladesh climate policy and diplomacy. When I started, I was curious to question what seems to me to be a paradoxical identity. Both inside and outside the country, Bangladesh is alternatively depicted as one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, but also as a champion of adaptation and a model to follow in this field. So can a country be at the same time vulnerable and resilient? And to what extent is it strategic to play both cards in the United Nations climate governance? So my answer to this apparent paradox is to define Bangladesh as a weak power climate leader. By weak power, I mean the capacity of Bangladesh to transform its vulnerability into a comparative advantage and a diplomatic tool to increase its influence on negotiation processes. So in other terms, the vulnerability of Bangladesh is positively correlated with its influence in climate negotiations and is a lever for political action. So the concept of weak power pushes us to change our perception of vulnerable countries that are far from being only victims, but also active players in the fight against climate change. Before introducing more in details this idea of weak power, I'd like to say that it's also with some emotions that I'm taking the floor today. I come back to Bangladesh after more than 4 years since I came the last time. And I'm enthusiastic to see to what extent the country has changed or is remained the same. And of course to see again friendly and familiar faces that I've met here. But it's also quite challenging to come here to share the key insight of my research in front of some of the persons whose practices and discourses I've deconstructed in a critical way. And I would like to use this opportunity to say a big thank you to Salimul Haq for his invitation to give a speech today and for all the time he has given to me while I was a visiting researcher at ICAD. So to understand how the weak power is exercised, we need to consider both the resources developed at the national level and the strategies and forms of leadership detained in climate negotiations. So let me first start with the internal dynamics that have enabled Bangladesh to acquire what I've called a first mover advantage. So because of its severe exposition to tropical cyclones and floods, Bangladesh has acquired since its independence a strong experience to deal with natural disasters. The people of Bangladesh have adapted their homes, their villages, and their crops to cope with frequent flooding. The government has undertaken plans and programs for reducing human and material losses due to disasters, and in partnership with NGOs and experts. And those efforts have allowed major successes. The death toll from cyclones in Bangladesh, for example, has decreased significantly over time. And of course, the increasing frequency and intensity of natural disaster because of climate change pose major present and future challenges for the country. But still, Bangladesh is well ahead of many countries, including developed ones, in disaster management. And the same is true for adaptation. Climate change will have devastating impacts on lives, livelihoods, and economic growth. And it threatens the ambition of the country to become a middle-income country by its 50th anniversary of its independence in 2021. And the government has been thus very proactive to develop forward-looking policy initiatives to mitigate adverse impacts of climate change. Let me give you 2 brief examples. Bangladesh has been the first least developed country to frame a comprehensive climate change strategy and action plan in 2009. And it's also the first developing country the same year to establish a national climate fund with its own resources, showing to the rest of the world that the country is not waiting for outside help, but acting now and despite its limited resources and also some governance problems. And the government has been praised by the international community for its pioneering role in the adaptation field. The Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, has, for instance, received in 2015, just before the COP21, the United Nations Champion of the Earth Award for her outstanding leadership on the front line of climate change. But besides these governmental efforts, no one can understand how Bangladesh is become a champion of adaptation without considering its vibrant NGO sector and extraordinary community resilience. Lots of Bangladeshi people are living in precarious conditions and hostile environment. But it's fascinating to observe the resilience of these people that never give up. Some of them move several times in their life when erosion takes away their homes. others who lose their homes also due to cyclones rebuild their houses. And again, Bangladeshi people move forward to build a better life. And they have accumulated an experiential knowledge that is an immense resource for everyone to deal with climate change impacts. And the NGO sector has also played a key role in implementing innovating programs to increase the awareness of climate change risks among the most vulnerable population, to provide them basic services, and to help them turning their local knowledge into sources of resilience. And if adaptation is of course a top priority for Bangladesh, the country has also shown its commitment for fighting climate change in investing in energy transition. Bangladesh has already the fastest growing solar home system dissemination in the world, supplying electricity to around 20 million households, especially in remote areas. And this rapid development of renewable energy in the country would not have been possible without important efforts to involve the private sector in climate finance. So what's the point I want to make here? My point is that vulnerability has been a fertile ground for innovation and experimentation. Bangladesh has acquired a first-mover advantage in being the first to develop adaptation and disaster risk reduction policies. The country has been an example of good practices in this field and set up as a model to follow. We have more to learn from a poor country like Bangladesh in terms of climate and disaster resilience than from the rest of developed countries. If you want to learn about resilience, Bangladesh is definitely the place to be. So this point leads me to another building block of the weak power that is deeply connected to the first mover advantage. It's the idea that Bangladesh is also became a southern expertise hub for research on adaptation. And as Salimul Haq said one day, one of the peculiar features of adaptation as a science is that the rich have no advantage. The poor have a comparative advantage because they sit on the problem and they have to face it. So Bangladesh is often placed at the top of international rankings, such as the Climate Change Vulnerable Index of Maplecroft. And this recognition has placed the country under the spotlight and provoked a renewed attention from international donors and experts. And Bangladesh has become a very attractive place for foreign scientists willing to analyze the already observable impacts of global warming. And they have developed, in partnership with national experts, pilot research projects and new methodologies. The Action Research for Community Adaptation in Bangladesh, or ARCAB program, is a very good example of this. ARCAB is a long-term and collaborative platform for action research on community-based adaptation to climate change, and it's gathering international and national NGOs and experts. The Gobeshona conference, or the community-based conference also, are a perfect example of this, as it brings each year in Bangladesh national and international scientists and practitioners working on climate change and who can share knowledge with mutual benefit. And so because vulnerability has been a fertile ground for innovation and experimentation in Bangladesh, it has also been a strong asset for Bangladesh leadership in scientific studies on climate adaptation. And it has contributed to its international scientific prestige in this field of research. A noteworthy evidence of this is to look at the contribution of Bangladeshi scientists to the IPCC reports. It's well known that Northern expertise is much more represented than, in the IPCC reports than the Southern expertise. However, when you look at the national origin of contributing authors, Bangladesh is overrepresented compared to other least developed countries in Working Group 2 on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. So this first mover advantage, as well as the intellectual leadership of Bangladesh in the field of adaptation, are two key components of the weak power. And Bangladesh has emerged as a very proactive player in the fight against climate change, paving the way for ambitious adaptation measures. But Bangladesh has also become a leading voice amongst the least developed countries in the Conference of Parties. And there are two main kinds of strategies used by Bangladesh and other vulnerable and poor states to defend their interests in climate negotiation that I would like to mention here. So the first one relates to their moral leadership, and the second one to coalition building with state and non-state actors. So as the most vulnerable states, but also the least responsible for greenhouse gas emissions, poor Asian and African states are considered as innocent victims of climate change. And this recognition gives to these countries a moral leadership that is an important asset for them in negotiations. They make emotional statements in the Conference of Parties to raise international attention on their vulnerabilities and also to alert the world on the dangers of climate change that could displace millions of people in the world, threaten human security, or even sometimes national security. And so this strategic use of alarmist scenarios, either they are real or exaggerated, help to put pressure on developed countries to assume their moral duty in considering the special needs of most vulnerable countries. So vulnerable states have claimed to have the moral right to request strict targets, such as a 1.5 degree Celsius threshold instead of the 2 degrees Celsius target. They have also claimed to ask for assistance, such as priority in receiving funding for adaptation and technology transfer. And they have also demanded immediate, ambitious, and binding action from all countries. Unfortunately, the effect of this moral leadership is more symbolic than real. Industrialized countries are far from meeting their commitments in terms of climate finance, and so they fail to address the needs of developing countries. But this moral leadership has yet helped to give a stronger visibility and voice to these countries that are too often marginalized in international negotiations. Another powerful strategy used by every country in a multilateral negotiation, but that is particularly important for weaker parties, is to negotiate collectively. While these countries are rather weak alone, they become stronger together. So delegations from developing countries are constrained in their capacity to participate effectively in decision-making processes in many ways. Their national delegations are often teeny, which makes them unable to attend all the different parallel negotiation meetings. They lack expertise on various issues at stake in the negotiations, or some delegations can also suffer linguistic problems when they come, for instance, from French-speaking countries. And so building coalition is thus a key strategy for weaker parties that want to overcome these barriers to their effective participation. And we can identify two ways through which weaker parties increase their influence by acting collectively. The first way is by seeking logistical and scientific support from NGOs and experts. A good illustration of this are, for example, training and support programs implemented by the European Capacity Building Initiative. This joint program aims to develop skills and capacity among developing country negotiators so that they can better represent their country's interests. And this partnership between state and non-state actors also takes the form of a participation of NGO members and academics in the national delegations. These strategies become common for LDCs to increase both the size of their delegation and their expertise on specific issues. When you look at the Bangladesh delegation, for instance, which is quite big in size given its limited human and financial resources, you note that several leading national experts in the field of climate change are part of the delegation from the beginning of the UNFCCC negotiation to assist government officials. So while the LDCs are developing their negotiation capacities, they also organize themselves into specific political groupings to join their forces and defend a common position. So the G77 plus China remains the key negotiating bloc for developing countries within the UNFCCC. But the heterogeneity of this group and growing disparities between emerging economies and others make difficult a proper representation of the specific concern of the least developed countries. So the LDC group has thus emerged in 2001, as well as the Climate Vulnerable Forum more recently. This Climate Vulnerable Forum is not a negotiating group per se, but it's become a very vocal advocacy group since the COP21. You probably remember the successful CVF campaign prior and during the COP21 that led to the recognition of the safe threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius in the Paris Agreement. The CVF has played a key role in providing a fresh and positive momentum during the COP21, and this role continues today. Initial reluctance from developed countries that would prefer to keep loss and damage as a subcategory of adaptation. It's true that this victory must be qualified, since the devil is often in the details. A provision states in the article that the inclusion of loss and damage in the Paris Agreement cannot provide any basis for liability. And following discussion at COP22 and COP23 have shown little progress in the implementation of this Article 8. However, for vulnerable countries engaged in the issue of loss and damage, and Bangladesh has been a key designer and promoter of loss and damage, the standalone recognition of this issue in the Paris Agreement, as well as the perpetuation of the Warsaw International Mechanism, still represent a success. Now that I'm close to the end of my speech, what conclusion should we draw from all of this? Bangladesh is a weak power climate leader because the country has been able to transform its vulnerability as an asset to develop forward-looking policy initiatives and a strong expertise on adaptation. The country also conducts an active diplomacy in the UNFCCC, along with other vulnerable states with whom it shares a moral leadership and collective interest. And those countries have been able to shape climate negotiations much more than the initial power distribution could suggest. Of course, this weak power remains per definition weak. It does not reverse the asymmetrical nature of multilateral negotiations. Weaker parties can successfully influence the negotiation process and the agenda setting of the UNFCCC. But they still lack power, unfortunately, to effectively influence the outcomes that remain a result of bargaining between stronger parties. And this weak power is also fragile. Political instability, poor governance, non-sustainable political commitment, insufficient investment in training and education constitute some of the limitations of a sustainable pursuit of this weak power. Universities have a crucial role to play in this regard. They must develop adequate trainings so that young people in developing countries can become entrepreneurs and problem solvers for their country, but also for the rest of the world. That's why we can only welcome with excitement the recent creation of the Least Developed Countries Universities Consortium on Climate Change, a South-South and long-term capacity building program. So I'd like to conclude by saying that the current context offers a tremendous opportunity for most vulnerable countries to increase their leadership in the climate change region. They can partly fill the leadership vacuum left by the United States withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, and they have already started. A show of their growing leadership is, for instance, the unilateral declaration of the Climate Vulnerable Forum countries at the end of the COP22 in Marrakesh, when these countries have announced their intention to shift to 100% renewable energy by 2050 without any preconditions. So most vulnerable countries are the best guardians of the climate regime, as they can pave the way for more ambitious climate action in the future. The time has really come to change our perception about these countries. They are not passive victims, receiving lessons from the rest of the world. They have emerged as key players of the fight against climate change, and they can give lessons to the world that we should listen. I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very successful conference.
Thank you, Dr. Valet, for that informative and thought-provoking paper. May I now request our special guest, Dr. Carrie Reeves, Deputy Director, Environment, USAID, to say a few words. Dr. Reeves, please.
Good morning. Sorry, my voice is a little in and out, so hopefully it'll stay in long enough to make it to the short remarks. They're only about 30 pages long. My name's Kerry. I am the head of the environment programs for USAID in Bangladesh. And on behalf of USAID, I'm pleased to be joining the fourth Gobeshona climate conference. USAID's partnered with ICAD and IUB for several years, and I'm very happy to be here. I'd like to start by thanking Dr. Atik Rahman for chairing this session. And I also want to thank Dr. Selina Hook and Professor Omar Rahman, as well as the students of ICAD and IUB for bringing us together for this week of learning and sharing of ideas. And I'd especially like to thank Dr. Ellen for your very interesting research. And finally, I'd like to thank all of our partners. The long list of partners that were shown earlier, for bringing together such an important and interesting group of students and scientists, researchers, and experts to share your ideas over the next week on the very complex challenges facing Bangladesh in the coming years. The government of Bangladesh has made it clear that they're very committed to addressing the vulnerabilities facing Bangladesh and the people of Bangladesh. And USA is very happy to be partnering with them to support those efforts. USAID has invested in education since its inception. Over the last 5 to 10 years, has started to increase their investment in higher education and research. And as an area that I'm particularly interested in, and I think that science diplomacy is one of the areas that has the greatest potential. I used to be a researcher. I'm not anymore, I'm a bureaucrat. Some days I really miss field research, but on colder days I don't miss it that much. We're very proud to be here with you, the young researchers, as you share your ideas over the next week. Many of you may become leaders in your fields and may be the influencers who make dramatic changes in Bangladesh and elsewhere. Or you may move into other fields, and you may apply the lessons you've learned as a researcher to ask questions, to form interdisciplinary teams. You may apply those to other sectors, and maybe that's how you make it. Research is certainly a specialized field, and it's not for everyone. The things that you learn as you develop the skills to be a good researcher are useful no matter what sector you do move into. Over the next week, you'll hear some great talks and you'll hear some good talks. I encourage you to ask questions, ask difficult questions, not of me, but of the other researchers. And to attend sessions that you might not normally attend. To talk to people you might not normally speak to. Because that's really how you'll make a difference, and that's really where you'll learn. So on behalf of USAID, I look forward to the next week, to the interesting discussions that we'll be attending, and I wish you all the best with your research and over the coming sessions. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Reeves, for your encouraging words and comments, and thank you also for your continued support. We very much appreciate that. Now it is my privilege to request Professor M. Omar Rahman, Vice Chancellor of the Independent University of Bangladesh, to kindly deliver his address. Professor Rahman.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to IUB and welcome to the 4th Gobeshona conference. We at IUB are very, very proud to co-sponsor this effort, which is in its 4th year, and I think it's a wonderful initiative. And much of my work has been easier because of the very comprehensive sort of descriptions that have been given of what Gobeshona is about and what it hopes to achieve by Dr. Salimul Haq and the other speakers. So I'd like to touch on just a couple of points. First, I think research is crucial. I think there's no question that climate change is an existential issue for the world, and particularly for Bangladesh. But if we are going to move forward, we need to develop a knowledge base and to come up with new innovative solutions to very complex problems. And for that, we need research. And one of the problems the developing countries have faced is a real paucity of infrastructure for research and a culture of research. And I think in both of these respects, I think Gobeshona is playing a very, very pioneering and important role. I think it's crucial that we develop the next generation of researchers, that we teach them to think analytically, to ask the right questions, and to think about ways that those questions may be addressed. As a researcher myself for many years in academia, I have often thought that the way we teach young researchers is actually quite archaic, and it's this sort of this apprenticeship model where you learn by doing, and there isn't any formal sort of introduction to the methods and means of doing research. And I think Gobeshona, by taking under its wing young researchers and trying to get them to think in a formal way of how to get their work published. And I think that's important. A lot of very good work is done, but much of it is lost if it isn't brought to fruition in a forum which is accessible. And if you don't get published in a peer-reviewed journal, the chances are it will never see the light of day and it will just lie on some dusty shelf. And that would be really unfortunate. But I think to get your work published takes quite a bit of work and quite a little bit of effort to try to put it in a format which makes sense to your peers. And it's important that this peer recognition is crucial for the credibility of the research. So I think Gobeshona is doing wonderful work with regard to that, and I think the more we can expand this cadre of young researchers who can learn the ropes, we will all be benefited from it. As a university, of course, IUB has been very, very committed to this effort of developing both national and international capacity. We are proudly celebrating our 25th anniversary of this year. We started in 1993 with 6 students, and now we have 7,000. And our aspirations are appropriately ambitious. We are well on our way of becoming, we are already among the top universities in the country, and we are well on our way of getting both regional and international recognition. And the 2 pillars that IUB is based on, and which our Board of Trustees has given us a mandate to pursue, this vision is about research and global partnerships, and I think the Gobeshona platform and eCard are emblematic of this kind of commitment that the university has of promoting research, of nurturing research, and of forging close partnerships globally. Just to go back to the first speaker, Dr. Salimul Haq's outline of what has been achieved in the past year, I must say I'm very, very impressed. It was a very ambitious agenda, and I'm amazed that there are so many different pieces of it and there has been admirable work done in every respect. I'm particularly keen on the consortia, both of the least developed countries and of the larger consortia with Oregon State University, which we are part of. I think the whole world needs to develop capacity, and particularly the developing world. And one definition of being a developing country is that everything that happens to you is researched and written off by people other than from your own country. And I think that's actually a fairly good definition. You're a developing country if a lot is written about you, but it's all written by people who are not from your part of the world. I mean, this is not, I mean, I'm not a nationalist in any way, and I think research is by its definition global. But I think there is a bit of a problem, and a big problem, if all of the intellectual work is being done by just one section of the world. And I think it's crucial that we develop the human capital, and we develop the capacity, and you know, all of these things take time, they take effort, and I'm very proud to say that IUB is part of this global effort to develop sort of creative and research capacity in the world as a whole. And ICARD is, I think, a very strong partner in that. So this platform, I think, is very close to my heart, and I think all of the things that are being done are crucial. And I want to make the point about sustainability. A lot of very interesting initiatives start off with a big bang, and there's a lot of hopes and aspirations associated with them, but keeping them going, that's tough. And so I'm particularly pleased that we're in our 4th year. That means we've kept it going for 4 years, and that's a very laudable achievement. And the university is in its 25th year, and that's another kind of initiative, which is, of course, in many ways a more deeper, more sort of embedded initiative of trying to build capacity. So the fact that so many young people are getting involved, and the fact that you have 2,000 papers already in your website, just so shows that, you know, the latent capacity is there, and you need to tap it, you need to leverage it, you need to bring it up to speed. So I want to thank all of the different partners that have been involved in this initiative. First and foremost, Dr. Salimul Haq with ICARD, which of course is a tripartite collaboration between IUB, IIED, and the Bangladesh Center for Advanced Studies headed by Dr. Atiq Rahman. I think this, when it first started, I have to say that I think it was 2007, it just seemed like a pie in the sky kind of a thing. And I was, you know, very supportive of it, but I must say I'm incredibly impressed with how far it's come in basically a decade. I think it has exceeded whatever sort of goals that Salim Bhai and Atiq Bhai and the founders of it had, and I'm very proud to say that IUB had the foresight to be to co-sponsor it and to be there right at the beginning and to sustain its support, which we are happy to do. And we have really become a truly, I think, a global partnership. And I think that's what attracts me particularly, that this is not just a national effort. As you can see by the logos, you know, you have 50 odd institutions in the country, and you have an enviable list of international partners. I do want to make a point here, which is kind of an interesting point. You know, we talk a lot about South-South collaboration. Unfortunately, in the world, North-South collaboration tends to work much better. There are lots of complex political reasons, and I think some of them were actually brought up by our keynote speaker. You know, people gravitate to where the money is, and the money is, unfortunately, for most cases, in the North. So North-South collaborations have a natural tendency to develop. On the other hand, South-South collaborations are much more difficult to nurture. I'm particularly happy that we've been able to involve so many actors in the national stage, because oftentimes what happens is that people, I think in a very short-sighted view, feel that that we don't want to involve other national partners because the pool of money available from the North will be subdivided. And I think that's really short-sighted, and at the end of the day, you can't do big projects or take big initiative unless you get a lot of actors. So I'm very, very happy that Gobeshona is a perfect example of both South-South and North-South. And I think it's pursuing initiatives in both realms. And I think that's the only way to move forward globally. So once again, thank you all for coming. I think the next 3 days we're going to learn a lot, and hopefully the young researchers will learn something from that experience and will become better for it. We at IUB are very, very proud and privileged and happy to co-sponsor this, and we will continue our support for this wonderful initiative. It would be remiss of me to end without mentioning USAID's wonderful collaboration and cooperation and contribution. I think this is a wonderful way of building national, regional, and international capacity. So thank you again for coming.
Thank you so much, Professor Rahman, for your illuminating summary and profound and in-depth observations, which will act as a beacon for the proceedings of the conference. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the inaugural session, so thank you all. However, just some points to note as we move along through the day. The inaugural group photo will be taken at the center court, which is outside, followed by a tea break in the food court. All participants are requested to do their registration near the entrance before the plenary session, which will commence at 11:30 in the multipurpose hall across the auditorium. So thank you all. Please feel free to move along. However, I would like to request the panelists here to kindly stay back for a group photo. And also I wanted to remind you that we talked about a number of things here that were actually underscored by the presenters. Keywords about coalition building, about networking, about South-South, South-North, North-South partnership building, and so forth. We're talking about a lot of key points here, which are actually crucial to disseminate. So keeping that in mind, we request you to kindly tweet your messages out. And if you would kindly do hashtag Gobeshona4 and send those words of wisdom out to your partners, whether they be in Bangladesh or elsewhere in the world, we'd highly appreciate that as we move forward in coalition building. Thank you so much.